In this lesson, we're going to cover Big Idea 3, Standard 2, and our topic is ionization. We already learned about ionization last unit, but we're going to go over it again because this will be the basis of all of Big Idea 3. If you cannot determine the number of valence electrons and you cannot predict charge, you're really going to struggle with this unit. So first, let's review the octet rule. Remember that prefix oct means 8, like an octagon. An octagon has 8 sides. Oct means 8. So the octet rule states that elements prefer to have 8 valence electrons. So an example of an element that follows the octet rule would be neon. And this is the electron configuration for neon. Valence electrons are in the outermost energy level. The outermost energy level is the second energy level. And I could see that there are 8 valence electrons. The reason why we want 8 valence electrons, it is due to the full S and P orbitals. It's going to make elements very stable. So atoms will go through the process that we call ionization, which is just a fancy word of saying that atoms will become ions. Ionization is when atoms will gain or lose electrons until there are 8 valence electrons. So let's say I had fluorine. And as an atom, its electron configuration is 1s2, 2s2, 2p5. Fluorine has 7 valence electrons. That means fluorine will gain 1 electron. If it gains 1 electron, its charge would be -1. If it gains 1 electron, its electron configuration is going to go from 2p5 up to 2p6. Now let's look at that second energy level, the outermost energy level. And now we have 8 valence electrons. So the whole reason that fluorine is going to gain 1 electron is because it wants to follow the octet rule. It wants 8 valence electrons. Let's look at a positive ion. Let's look at sodium. Sodium's outermost energy level is the third energy level, and it has 1 valence electron. So sodium can either gain 7 electrons, but that would take a lot of energy. So instead, sodium can lose 1 electron. If it loses an electron, and electrons are negative, it's like subtracting a negative, sodium becomes positive. If it loses 1 electron, it's going to get rid of this 3s1, so my electron configuration is 1s2, 2s2, 2p6. Now the second energy level becomes outermost, and again we have 8 valence electrons. Notice that the electron configuration of neon, the fluorine ion, and the sodium ion are all the same. We would call that isoelectric. Fluorine starts with a total of 9 electrons and it gains 1 to match neon. Sodium starts with 11 total electrons, it loses 1 to match neon. All right. We're going to make a little table. And this, again, you should know, we talked about it, but I want to make sure you have it in your notes as a resource. So in one column, we're going to have the group. In the second column, we're going to have the number of valence electrons. Next, we're going to list the number of electrons either gained or lost. And lastly, we're going to list the charge. So let's start with the first group, which is group number 1. The group number is equal to the number of valence electrons. So if an element is in group 1, it has 1 valence electron. If an element is in group 2, it has 2 valence electrons. If an element is in group 3, it has 3 valence electrons. If an element is in group 4, it has 4 valence electrons. Remember last unit, we said if an element is in groups 1 through 4, it tends to lose electrons. And it is going to lose all of its valence electrons. So if there's 1 valence electron, that element would lose 1 electron. If it loses an electron, it's like subtracting a negative and it becomes positive. If we're losing 1 electron, the charge would be +1. Elements in group 2 have 2 valence electrons, they're going to lose 2 valence electrons. If we lose 2 electrons, the charge will be +2. Elements in group 3 have 3 valence electrons. They will lose 3 to form a charge of +3. Elements in group 4 will lose 4 valence electrons and have a charge of +4. We said elements in groups 4 through 7 will gain electrons. So group 4 can go either way. We can either lose 4 electrons or gain 4 electrons. If we're losing electrons, the charge would be +4. If we're gaining electrons, the charge would be -4. So this sometimes confuses students. If we're gaining, well, why is it negative? Remember that electrons are negative. So if you're gaining electrons, it's like adding a negative, and it is going to become negative. All right, remember the goal is to get to 8 valence electrons. Elements in group 5 have 5 valence electrons. They want 8. That means they're going to have to gain 3 electrons. If they're gaining 3 electrons, their charge would be -3. Elements in group 6 have 6 valence electrons. They want 8 electrons, so they need to gain 2. Their charge would be -2. Elements in group 7 have 7 valence electrons. They want 8, so they are going to gain 1 electron. Therefore, the charge will be -1. If you haven't done this already, grab your periodic table. Above group 1, write +1. Above group 2, write +2. Above group 3, write +3. Above group 4, we're going to do plus or -4. And then -3, -2, -1. You could put a 0 above the noble gases because noble gases already have 8 valence electrons, so they are not going to ionize. All right, for the rest of this lesson, we are just going to do some example problems. First one. An element has 3 valence electrons. Predict its charge after ionization. Number 2. Predict the charge of oxygen when it ionizes. Number 3. When calcium ionizes, it will gain or lose blank electrons. So you're going to tell me how many electrons calcium will either gain or lose. Let's do the same thing for bromine. When bromine ionizes, it will either gain or lose, circle 1. And then tell me how many electrons. Last one. Ions of magnesium, oxygen, and nitrogen will all form electron configurations similar to which noble gas? All right, so this whole lesson should be a review. So I want you guys to pause the video, try this on your own, come back and see how you did. So first one, an element has 3 valence electrons. If it is in group 1, 2, 3, or 4, it is going to lose electrons. It's going to lose all 3. So my charge would be +3. Looking at our little cheat sheet, elements that are in group 3 have 3 valence electrons. They will lose 3 electrons and have a charge of +3. Next, predict the charge of oxygen when it ionizes. So if you wrote those charges on your periodic table, it makes it really easy. Oxygen is in group 6. It wants 8 valence electrons. It gains 2, so its charge would be -2. Next one, when calcium ionizes, will it gain or lose electrons, and then how many? So calcium is in group 2. 1 through 4 will lose electrons. Since calcium is in group 2, it is going to lose 2 electrons. We could also look at our cheat sheet, find the group that calcium is in. It's in group 2. It has 2 valence electrons. It will lose 2 electrons. Let's find bromine. Bromine is right here. It is in group 7. It has 7 valence electrons. It wants 8. Therefore, it is going to gain 1 electron. Again, the whole reason that elements ionize is to have 8 valence electrons. It wants those full s and p orbitals. Last one. Ions of magnesium, oxygen, and nitrogen will all form electron configurations similar to which noble gas. So what I would do for all of these is figure out their charge. Once you know their charge, we can figure out how many electrons they have as ions. So magnesium is in group 2. Its charge is +2. Next, figure out how many electrons magnesium has. Magnesium has 12 protons. We don't know how many electrons there are, but I know that its charge has to be +2. Solve for the number of electrons. The magnesium ion has 10 electrons. Let's do the same thing with oxygen. Oxygen will form an ion with a charge of -2. Oxygen is atomic number 8, so it has 8 protons. Protons are positive, so I have 8 positives, and I have to get to a charge of -2. Again, solve for x. 8 minus 10 equals -2. Oxygen also has 10 electrons. Let's just double check with nitrogen to be sure. Nitrogen, as an ion, will form a charge of -3. Nitrogen is atomic number 7. It has 7 protons. Protons are positive. We don't know how many electrons, but we have to get to a charge of -3. 7 minus 10 equals -3. This nitrogen ion also has 10 electrons. So now let's go back and answer the question. Which noble gas has 10 electrons? Find atomic number 10. Our answer would be